Hello and welcome to my channel. So today's video is going to be all about the assassination of the King of Serbia and his wife. Alexander I of Serbia was born on the 14th of August 1876 in Belgrade, Serbia. He was the son of Milan I of Serbia and Natalia Kesko. Alexander's childhood had not been that great. His mother and father actually hated each other. Milan was a serial womanizer, and Natalia had actually caused a scandal in 1887 by moving to the Crimea with Alexander. Now, in 1889, King Milan abdicated really suddenly and unexpectedly, so Alexander became King of Serbia at the age of 12 years old. When he had abdicated, Milan said that he would leave Serbia until Alexander's majority, but he also said that Natalia had to leave as well. Natalia refused to do so, so the entire Belgrade garrison had to be used to get her across the border. Now, when he reached 16 years old, Alexander decided that he was old enough to rule the country on his own, so he dismissed his regents, suspended the constitution and assumed control of the government. Now, governments were formed and dissolved over the next 10 years, and to try and calm the political waters, Alexander did introduce a fully independent Senate. So, while he was visiting his mother one time, Alexander fell in love with one of her ladies-in-waiting, Draga Mason. She was a widow who was 9 years older than Alexander. He would loiter outside his mother's apartments in hopes of seeing her. But even though Alexander really liked Draga, she wasn't actually well liked by other people. Now, Draga's family life wasn't that great. Her father had died in a lunatic asylum and her mother was an alcoholic. Her first husband was also an abusive drunk and gambler who had committed suicide. But the reason people didn't like Draga was because they thought that she was manipulative, insincere and poorly bred. They thought that Alexander was just a naive young man and that Draga was leading him on. Draga started to appear by Alexander's side at functions, and rumours started going around that Alexander had been well and truly whipped by her. It was said that he would not do anything without her approval and that he would rearrange state functions to suit her. So the day soon came that people had dreaded when Alexander announced that he wanted to marry Draga. Both his parents were not happy about this. They had just been restored to the royal family after being in exile, but because of their opposition to the marriage, Alexander exiled them all over again. Members of the royal household and government were also not happy about the marriage. Alexander's private secretary quit on the spot, and the interior minister, Dord Jenchik, told Alexander that he couldn't marry Draga because she had had many sexual relationships with many men, himself included. Alexander was not happy about being told this, so he slapped Dord and reminded him that Dord's wife had actually been a sexual partner of Alexander's father. Alexander had Dord in prison and the entire government resigned. Alexander and Draga married on the 5th of August 1900. In 1901 it was thought that Draga was pregnant, but she wasn't. And this was because Draga was actually infertile, but Alexander refused to believe this. Knowing that they were trying for children, and when pregnancies did not appear, rumours started to go around. One of these rumours was that Draga planned to palm off her sister's child as her own. Now, the press had an absolute field day with the royal couple constantly sniping at them. They reported that divorce was imminent and that Alexander had actually grabbed Draga by the throat and hit her in an argument over money. So because of this, Alexander wanted to have everyone who spoke ill about them arrested, but Draga managed to talk him out of it. But with everything that had gone on, seeds had been sown and a military conspiracy started to come together. The military conspiracy was started by an army officer known as Apis. His real name will be across the screen. and Alexander Massin, Dragda's brother-in-law. The former Interior Minister, Dord Gentic, was their civilian figurehead. The conspirators pledged, anticipating certain collapse of the state and blaming for this primarily the king and his paramour Dragda Massin, we swear that we shall murder them. In early 1903, the conspirators did manage to install an assassin in the royal kitchens. His mission was to poison the royal couple's food, but the head chef caught him putting some white powder into one of the pans. The would-be assassin was forced to eat the food that he had poisoned, and he died in agony. Though the press did actually run a different story saying that Alexander had stormed into the kitchen and shot the assassin. Now, after his near assassination, Alexander was not fazed. He declared, "I am not afraid of revolutions. If anyone rebels against me, I am ready to meet him sword in hand at the head of my faithful army." On the night of the 10th of June 1903, a group of between 50 and 150 army officers gathered together. They drank and toasted each other, getting more and more drunk. They then began to walk towards the royal palace, but this was no spur of the moment thing. Everything that they were going to do from now on had been planned down to the last detail. When they reached the palace, a man inside opened up the gate to them. A guard who was not part of the conspiracy and loyal to Alexander rushed to shut the gate against them, but he was shot in the head. One of the conspirators woke up the 6th Regiment from their garrison, gave them 5 rounds each and told them to seal off the streets around the palace. He told them that King Alexander wanted Dragda removed from the country just like his mother had been. They were to prevent forces loyal to the Queen from interfering in her removal and to also ignore any cries that came from the palace. One of the men drugged Alexander's aide-de-camp General Petrovic. Another man drugged Alexander's aide-de-camp General Petrovic to stop him from getting in the way, while other conspirators planned to kill the Prime Minister, the Minister of War and Dragda's 2 brothers who were not liked. When the conspirators tried to open the door to the palace, they actually found it locked. But the conspirators had prepared for any eventuality, so they came loaded with dynamite that they used to blow open the doors, but in doing so they plunged the palace into darkness. Now, the man who had drugged General Petrovic hadn't done a very good job at this, so he woke up and demanded an explanation about what was going on. He stood on the stairs that led to the royal bedchambers to try and stop the conspirators from going up there, but they just pushed past him. They found the bedchambers, but the bedchambers were empty, so they forced General Petrovic to tell them where the king and queen were. He told them that the couple were hiding down in the cellar, so the conspirators went down there to look for them. But Alexander and Dragda were not down in the cellar. They were actually hiding behind a secret door in Dragda's dressing room. Realising that the general had lied to them, the conspirators killed him and then went looking through the palace for the king and queen. They did find a servant hiding, so they grabbed him and threatened him as to where the king and queen were, and fearing for his life, he nodded towards the secret door. Now, there are 3 versions about what happened next. The first is that an officer entered the secret room alone and demanded Alexander abdicate. Alexander said, "I am not King Milan," so the officer shot him. The second version said that Dragda begged for her life while Alexander held her, and that they were both gunned down by their officers present. The officers then drew their swords and slashed at the king and queen's bodies while calling them rude names. The third version is the most bloodiest version. This account says an officer entered the room where Alexander was shielding Dragda with his body. The officer shot Alexander in the neck with an explosive bullet that nearly severed his head from his shoulders. Another man entered the room and shot at Dragda, but they missed, and then more men came into the room shooting at Dragda. They then drew their swords, slashing at Alexander's face and slicing over Dragda's stomach. The conspirators then dragged the king and queen's bodies out onto the balcony and then threw them onto the grass below where they could be seen from the street. Now, apparently Alexander wasn't actually dead, so he gripped onto the balcony, so the conspirators severed his fingers and he fell to the ground. The palace was then ransacked. 2 hours after Alexander and Draga had been killed, the Russian ambassador, who lived across the road from the palace and who had witnessed everything that had gone on, ordered his servants to take the king and queen's bodies inside. Their bodies were cleaned down with a garden hose before they were laid on the kitchen table. Surgeons were then called to perform autopsies on the bodies. They ruled that Draga was infertile and that Alexander was mentally insane, but honestly that doesn't really justify their murder. So before they were buried, the king and queen had a brief lying in state. The visitors who filed past their bodies apparently spat at the queen and made rude remarks. They were then buried with little fanfare while their murderers were honoured as saviours of the nation. But Serbia did not become a republic. Peter Karađorđević became Peter I of Russia. He was the third son of Alexander Karađorđević, Prince of Serbia, who had been forced into exile in 1858. Peter was smart, a moderniser and a reformer who had a vision to build a modern state. Apis, the main conspirator, helped found Unification or DEF, a terrorist network that was dedicated to building a greater Serbia by any means necessary. They are actually better known as the Black Hand, the terrorist organisation that assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914, kicking off World War I. So that is the story about the assassination of the King and Queen of Serbia. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.